opera didn't look abandoned from a distance. Its marble facade still held the stubborn belief that beauty could survive, neglect the way some flowers grow in the mortar of a ruined wall. The five of them stood at the curb, Henry, with a folded city survey in his pocket. Emma weighing structural risks with a frown. Brian hugging his camera rig like a life raft. Rose thumbing a velvet program she'd found in an estate sale. And Lucas, the only one who glanced up at the pediment and whispered, "She used to sing here." A streetcar hummed along the reservoir and then fell silent, leaving an empty hush that felt arranged like a conductor's baton freezing in the air. They didn't break in so much as peel back a scab. The side door had already been pried once, and the cold iron gave with a sigh when Henry pulled. The hinge released a low metallic groan, a note so slow and sour that Lucas winced as if it were off-key. Dust rose, glittered in a slant of morning, and settled into their hair as they slipped through. They stepped into breath held for a century. Somewhere deep inside the building, a faint drip counted the seconds, a steady plink that made Brian raise his camera and whisper that the place had a pulse. Rose, who admired the opera with an academic reverence, smoothed her jacket as if someone might be watching. Emma tested the floorboards with the toe of her boot, mapping weight, rot, and risk. Lucas trailed a few steps behind, touching the fluted plaster columns as if each leafed swirl might carry a remembered bar of music. The lobby unfurled in a long red sigh, faded carpet, a flurry of fallen plaster rosettes, walls the color of old theater curtains. The chandelier hung like a drowned thing, all bones and glass. When Henry's flashlight clicked on, the beams made the crystals tinkle the slightest bit, a fragile rain of glass-bright notes that died as quickly as they were born. "Imagine it in 1910, Rose said, gaze tilted upward. A gala night, gas lights, licking the ceiling silk and perfumed the aria that made her famous, Eliza Moreau." Lucas flinched. "Don't say her name like that." "Like what?" "Like a wish." From behind the ticket booth came the skitter of something small nails over tile, and then a thin squeal as it vanished, an animal sound that echoed longer than it should have. Brian swung the camera toward the booth and then back to the group, eyes bright. "Sound carries weird here," he whispered, like it's memorized the audience. They crossed the lobby and found the grand doors to the auditorium bolted. Emma traced the deadbolt's rust with a gloved finger. "Load-bearing above this frame is touchy," she said. And then almost gently, she tapped the wood with her knuckles. The knock answered itself once, twice, as if from inside a hollow thud retreating across rows of empty seats. Emma froze, hands still raised. "It's just an echo," Henry said, but his voice had the thinness of someone explaining away a shadow. He nodded to Lucas. "You said there's a side aisle." Lucas pointed toward a narrower corridor where wallpaper peeled like burned skin. "Orchestra pit access should be that way," he said. "Pianos would have come through here." He didn't mention that he had dreamed of this hallway for weeks, dreamed of the worn path in the carpet and the brass handrail polished by ghost palms. He didn't mention that in the dream, a woman sang a scale that started sweet and turned serrated, a bright vowel scraping into something not meant for a throat. They moved in single file, their flashlights coughing pale circles along the walls. Above them, from somewhere far in the rigging, a rope creaked with a tired rhythmic ache, one long moan, one short complaint, the sound of a ship at harbor, though there was no sea. Rose narrated for the mic on Brian's camera. The Chicago Opera closed after a catastrophic fire in December 1910. Rumors say the soprano refused to leave. Some say she was trapped in her dressing room. the official cause a gas light that ignited a painted drop. She touched the wall with the back of her fingers, a ceremonial gesture like asking permission. Eliza Moreau sang Visidarte at the gala. Her red gown became legend. A high, thin note tiptoed across the corridor, then, as if answering Rose's recital, one shy thread of sound, barely there, but pure enough to tighten the skin at the back of the neck. Lucas stopped so abruptly that Henry bumped him. "Hear that?" Lucas whispered. "No," Henry said too quickly. "Yes," Brian breathed. His microphone recorded an airy ribbon of tone, a frequency that seemed to slide along the plaster and hide in the cornices. The corridor broke onto a stair that curled toward the stage left wing. The first step protested, the second decided to hold, and they climbed, bodies pressed close to the wall, as Emma dictated where to place each foot. At the top, the wings stretched open like a backstage spine, sandbags, counterweights, fly lines that had become fossils. A draft issued from the stage and carried with it the faintest chime of metal on metal, as if unseen hands brushed past the rigging and set it ringing. They stepped out to the edge of the stage and saw the auditorium at last. Time had poured into it and dried in ripples velour seats matted with dust. Balconies sagging like tired eyelids, a stage floor pimpled with blisters where heat had once licked. And there, spilling from the ceiling like a red wound that refused to clot, hung a dress. It floated from a single wire, the silk ruined into a stiffer version of itself. Bodice, caved hem singed. The red was too bright for age. "Stunt dress," Emma said, suspicious. "Someone rigged that." Rose shook her head. "This building has been padlocked longer than we've been alive." Lucas moved closer to the wire, enthralled. She sang in red the night the fire ate the air. His voice acquired a cadence he didn't choose. From the farthest balcony, a whisper collected itself. "Shh." The sound of listeners leaning forward all at once. "Lucas," Henry warned. "Don't touch." Lucas didn't, but he reached out with his breath, and the silk turned a fraction slow as a late apology. Somewhere beyond the proscenium wood ticked one crack here, one snap there. The soft code old buildings used to talk about weatherweight and ghosts. Brian zoomed in the lens, drinking details a smear of ash on a seatback, the curl of plaster like a fallen petal, a gilt mask carved above the royal box with its mouth open in a permanent gasp. They planned their route as they always did. Recon in pairs, call-outs, every 2 minutes regroup if anyone answered late. Henry and Emma would check the catwalks for safe angles and collapse risks. Brian and Rose would sweep the house for ephemera, anything worth the story sheet music, a monogrammed brush, the rumor of a lawsuit. Lucas asked to remain at the stage. "I need to listen," he said, embarrassed by how true that was. Henry hesitated, then nodded. "You're on the line with me?" he said, tapping Lucas's walkie. No solo heroics. They split and the opera absorbed them. As Henry and Emma climbed the iron ladder to the grid, the rungs sighed in a cadence like breath, a weary inhale, a resolved exhale. Emma counted as she moved 12, 13, 14, not for herself, but for the building, as if it needed a metronome. In the house below, Brian called testing, testing, and his voice smeared across the auditorium in a syrupy echo, blooming into a chorus of Brian's that made Rose laugh and then clamp a hand over her mouth. Lucas stood alone with the red dress. In his periphery, he could feel the audience that wasn't there. Their impatience, their perfume, their anticipatory rustle. He closed his eyes, and the soprano arrived, as if she'd always been in his bones, a clear ribbon of sound that threaded the stage and tied a knot at his throat. It was not a song he knew, though he recognized pieces of everything in it: Puccini's Ache, Verdi's Vow, a lullaby someone's grandmother hummed on wicker porches. The notes sharpened and split into harmony, a second and a fifth plucked like wires inside his chest. Henry Lucas whispered into the walkie, but he didn't press the button. He only leaned into the desire to speak. His mouth stayed closed. A floorboard replied instead with a long, arthritic pop that moved from stage right to stage left, like footsteps pacing heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe. Lucas told himself it was thermal expansion, meaning the cold was arguing with the remnants of a fire a century dead. On the catwalk, Emma reached a junction where the ceiling had flaked down to lathe. She lifted a panel with both hands and peered into the cavity. "Christ," she said softly. "The joists are charred all the way through." Far below, a brittle cascade of dust rattled onto the seats like rain on tin. A sudden hiss making Brian duck and grin. "Got that," he whispered to his camera. "Paranormal precipitation." Rose moved through the aisles as if in church, her fingers grazing each chair back row after row like vertebrae. She stopped at a seat where someone had carved initials into the arm with a hairpin EM. Eliza Moreau, Rose breathed. Or everyone's mother. She thought of a woman in a red dress choosing this exact chair on a rehearsal day, sitting alone to hear how her voice bounced back at her. In the quiet, a single cough arrived from the balcony. Dry apologetic a patron practicing discretion, followed by the not-quite sound of a program ruffled open. Rose turned too fast, heart stuttering. "Brian," she said, "did you hear?" Before she could finish, a piano answered her three notes only soft enough to be a rumor: E, G sharp, B, the bones of a chord. Lucas's head jerked toward the orchestra pit. He had never met this piano, and yet it recognized him. "Hello," Lucas said, foolish as the word felt. "I'm a pianist. I've played, you know, everywhere." He laughed once, brittle. "I'm not your competition." The piano responded with a hesitant arpeggio, climbing like someone testing ankle strength after an injury. Lucas took 2 steps toward the pit before he remembered Henry's order. He lifted the walkie and pressed the button. "Henry, we have residual acoustics. Also possibly vagrants," he said, injecting humor. "I'm going to check the pit." "Negative," Henry crackled back. Static fizzed around his words, a bacon sizzle that flared, smothered, then returned with a pop. "Wait for me. Emma and I are descending." Lucas waited 1, 2, 10 seconds, and he didn't. Curiosity made excellent kindling, and the opera had matches. He slipped through the stage right wing and followed the narrow stairs down to the pit. With each step, the faint thump of his boots sounded like someone else's feet, half a heartbeat behind the echo, stalking him close. At the bottom, the pit opened into a crescent cave, smelling of damp velvet. A Steinway crouched there, draped in a moth-eaten cover. Lucas reached for the cloth, pausing as a new sound stitched itself into the air. It was the sound of breath behind him. Measured soprano's breath, not the animal panting of fear, but the rehearsed inhale of a performer about to risk her life for a note. He turned slowly. Nothing. Only the red dimness that old wood invents. He pulled the cover back. Dust eddied and keys stared up like little teeth. Lucas sat. The bench was solid enough to honor a ritual. He placed his fingers on C major, the way a Catholic kisses his grandmother's rosary. The first chord he played rang out clean, and then a second voice arrived on its back, an overtone that wasn't in the math, a thin silver thread that tied the chord to the rafters. He tried a melody, simple, gentle. The piano's voice grew warm, then warmer still, as if the wood remembered being a tree and rustled its leaves to applaud. He smiled despite himself. In the auditorium, Rose froze, turning toward the stage. "Lucas," she called. Her voice traveled out up and upward, multiplying into a soft cloud of roses, each one asking his name in a slightly different key. Brian panned, capturing the length of the hall and the dress, and whispered, "This is money." Above, Henry and Emma started down from the catwalk. "He's going to get himself hurt," Emma muttered. A wind rose through the grid, a hollow hoop that found every pipe, every pocket, and played the ceiling like a flute. Henry quickened his pace. Down in the pit, Lucas finished the phrase and lifted his hands. Silence fell so sudden it thumped, and in that vacuum, the faintest tap tapped under the bench. 2 taps, then 3 like knuckles on wood. Lucas stood, knelt, and put his ear to the hollow. From inside the bench came the softest humming, a woman's warm-up lip trills and scale fragments, intimate as a whisper in a dressing room. He opened the bench. There were pencils, a cracked metronome, a program with ink that bled at the edges, and a coil of piano wire, bright as a fresh vein. Lucas touched it and flinched, without knowing why. Above him, somewhere in the rigging, a counterweight shifted with a groan that rolled the length of the stage, a stone belly turning in its sleep. Lucas Henry's voice cut through at last as he trotted into the wings. "You wait until we..." He stopped when he saw the pianist kneeling by the bench. "Find anything?" "Music," Lucas said, because it felt like the only honest word. Emma joined them, scanning the fly lines. "This grid is a crime scene," she said. "Leave the counterweights alone." She pointed to a sag in the batten holding the red dress. "That wire shouldn't be under tension." Rose and Brian took the aisle toward the stage. Rose kept glancing up, as if the balconies had leaned forward an inch without making a sound. In the darkness overhead, the soft shuffle of matching fabric gathered the auditory mirage of an audience resettling in its seats for the final act. She made herself think of archives of facts that didn't care whether she believed in ghosts. They converged at center stage as if called for a bow. The red dress was above them, not spinning now, but poised. Henry laid out the plan for the next hour. Safe paths, camera setups, a brief monologue for Rose. When Lucas flinched, head cocked, a soprano quietly placed a note into the air like a lily on water. All of them heard it this time. None of them said they did. "Let's start with the boxes," Henry said. "Then we..." The note swelled without their permission, rich as butter and bright as a blade. And the building answered with its own orchestra. The low timpani of settling beams, the tremolo of rigging lines murmuring against each other, the hiss of dust slipping down sink. Brian's camera drank it greedily. "We should go," Emma said, too soft for it to count as an order. Rose shook her head once, then twice. "A minute more," she whispered, and then she raised her own voice into the rafters, not singing, but speaking as if to a crowd. "Eliza Moreau, if you linger here, we honor your art and your anger. We mean no harm." The words hung there, polite as Obud. Somewhere in the cheap seats, a single gloved clap answered one poised little sound that made every scalp prickle. Henry set his jaw. "Done," he said. "We're done for today." As if in reproach, the soprano's line turned from gilded to grit, a burn in the throat and the sound of a smile, cutting into a snarl, as it slid half a step off key and stayed there stubborn. Lucas closed the piano bench like a lid on a box with a snake. They started backing away. The red dress twitched. Emma's eyes flicked to the batten. That wire she started. A rope above answered with a sharp twang, the snapped violin sting of tension failing. "Move," Henry said. They did, though their feet seemed to learn new gravity. Overhead, sand hissed from a ruptured bag and poured in a thin, grainy rain that pattered the stage like 1,000 tiny feet. Brian didn't stop filming. They reached the wings and squeezed into the side corridor again. Behind them, a last note followed, clear and terrible, a promise sung on a single breath that did not run out for longer than lungs allow. Rose forced herself not to look back, because looking back had weight in stories like this, and she needed all her weight for leaving. At the door, Henry put his shoulder into the iron, and it stuck. He swore softly, reverently, as if cursing were prayer, and shoved again. The hinge that had welcomed them grew contrary. Metal shrieked an animal, a train, a choir of knives, and then let go all at once. They stumbled into daylight that felt invented. The city's ordinary sound rushed them car tires on wet asphalt, a whispered sigh of far laughter, the insistent peal of a bicycle bell. And for a moment, normal life hammered so loudly that the opera's private music nearly vanished. Nearly, because even in the sun they could still hear it if they let themselves. From the cool hollow of the auditorium, a soprano practiced the last note of her life over and over, each repetition a seam ripping a little farther. Henry put a hand on Emma's shoulder. She was breathing fast. "We regroup," he said. "We come back with a better plan. No more improvisation." Rose touched the velvet program in her pocket, the one with the smudged name, and felt the paper heat against her palm, as if held near a lamp. When the wind shifted, a faint crackle reached them wood, remembering flame, as if the past blistered open for a breath. Lucas looked up at the pediment again, and without meaning to whispered, "I'll play for you." The word "play" landed with a soft thud, and somewhere deep in the building, a piano returned a single patient note that waited at the end of the block, like a red light. No one said what they were all thinking, that the opera had been empty for too long and felt entitled now. That a red dress hanging from a wire was a hook in the mouth of a fish none of them had ever seen. That the voice belonged to a woman whose last aria had been smoke. They left because leaving was a ritual too, the first regression step one, and a pattern that ends in return. As they rounded the corner, a gull cried overhead, and the cry scratched the sky like chalk, and below it, fainter but truer, the soprano count of 2, 3, 4 kept time for them, as if they were only musicians late for their cue. They did not say they would come back at twilight, but they all chose clothes they could move in. They did not say they would set up multiple cameras, but Brian charged every battery. They did not say the name that might make an invitation formal. The opera said it for them. In the hour before sunset, under the city's buzz, the old house cleared its throat. They came back when the sky over Chicago held that bruised blue that makes windows into mirrors and turns every street into a stage. Henry had the keys he wasn't supposed to have, and the permission he didn't ask for. Emma wore a hard hat under a beanie and had a coil of nylon line clipped to her belt. Brian brought a Pelican case full of cameras and recorders and a spare pair of nerve. Rose arrived with a leather notebook for field notes and a flask she swore was tea. Lucas brought a tuning fork in his pocket like a talisman and what he refused to call hope. From the avenue, the city's early evening rumble pressed against the opera's facade, the faint chorus of tires' horns and far sirens before thinning into a hush at the threshold like music fading under a curtain. The side door remembered them and resisted less this time. Its hinge let go with a shorter, almost impatient groan. Dust coughed up as they passed. Somewhere deep inside the lobby, water tapped a new beat. Plink, plink, pause, plink, as if the building had been practicing while they were gone. Run the plan, Henry said, because plans were the bones he trusted. He unfolded a map he'd printed their routes, highlighter yellow. Emma with me for a structural walkthrough and rigging inspection grid to fly floor-to-flank catwalks. Brian and Rose House left to right boxes mez, then projection booth. Lucas, you are with Brian and Rose until we clear the pit for load paths. No playing until we say. Lucas nodded already, hearing the piano the way a person hears their own name in a crowd. In the air above the grand doors, a gentle metallic tick rippled along the chandelier crystals, the smallest conversation of glass teeth. Rose and Brian shared a look. Rolling in 5, Brian said, and he meant his cameras and also himself. They pushed into the auditorium. Dusk did generous things to ruin. Every scratch became patina, every sag a bow. The red dress still hovered from its wire like a punctuation mark, waiting to decide between exclamation and period. A draft slid across the stage and stroked the silk, and the fabric answered. Emma set a cone of light up the proscenium and took in the grid. We stay out from under that batten if anything twitches, she said. There's a domino path I don't like. She tapped the floor once with her boot. The stage replied with a hollow thud that traveled left, right then settled like a thought, changing its mind. Brian distributed recorders, small black boxes with red eyes. EVP at Center House Aisle 5, he said. He snapped his fingers, and the room gave it back a crisp double clap with a glassy aftertaste from the balcony. Acoustics are still shiny. He grinned half to the opera, half to himself. They took positions. Rose opened her notebook, and for her own courage read from a newspaper clipping she had printed that afternoon, December 18th, 1910. Fire at Chicago Opera 1, dead, many injured. Eliza Moreau, soprano. She paused. Some reports say she refused rescue to protect a wardrobe piece. She looked up at the red dress with distaste at her own sentence. I don't buy that, she said, mostly to Eliza. From the cheap seats, a smothered cough drifted down the exact polite cough of a patron who doesn't mean to interrupt. Rose froze, then continued reading. Investigators cite gaslight and painted canvas as accelerants. She lowered the page. That's a sentence that kills twice, once for the person, once for the art. Henry checked his watch. 15 minutes each station. Call-outs every 2. No improvisation, especially you, he added to Lucas. Before anyone could answer, a stray scale of notes brushed the upper air, Doremius singer's shy test in a head voice so faint it could have been memory. Lucas's shoulders cinched. I heard it, Emma said, because pretending not to would insult the engineer in her. Doesn't mean anything. They moved. Brian and Rose climbed the house-left aisle toward the boxes. Their steps released a soft shh from the carpet like someone telling secrets. In the first box, they found a child's shoe, missing its buckle, and a pewter opera glass worn smooth by a thumb. When Brian lifted it, the hinge chirped a bird's tiny squeak. Across the stage, Henry led Emma up the iron ladder to the fly floor. The ladder hummed in low complaint, with each footfall a bass string plucked by weight. Emma paused at a junction and put her ear to a cold pipe. Inside the pipe air moved with a faint organ sigh. Draft patterns are wrong, she said. There's convection up here without a temperature gradient. Meaning, Henry asked. Meaning the building's breathing on a rhythm I can't plot. At floor level, Lucas perched on the stage lip, like a musician waiting for the conductor's nod, not yet moving toward the pit. He kept his hands in his pockets to keep them off the keys. From the wings, rope ends clicked against a plywood wall and a slow, irregular metronome. He found it comforting until he didn't. Rose entered the second-tier box and stopped at the gilt frame around the royal seat. A crack through a carved laurel ran like a lightning bolt. In the velvet pocket behind the armrest, she found a folded card gala program benefit for the Widows Fund, on the back penciled in a neat hand read for luck. She showed it to Brian. There, she said softly to the dress. You wore it for you, not for them. A single-gloved clap answered from somewhere above, dainty, precise, too lonely to feel celebratory. Brian's smile dimmed. Our audience is punctual, he muttered. He put on his headphones and checked levels. What his mics heard was thicker than what his ears did, a velvet undercurrent of sighs, a throat clearing the thin zip of a program being opened. I'm getting crowd texture, he said, and tried to make it a joke and failed. Up on the fly floor, Emma crouched beside a counterweight stack. This rig wants to remember falling, she murmured. The pins are formalities at this point. She traced a line of rust with a fingertip. Don't stand under anything that remembers falling. A soft chime traveled the length of the grid, as if an unseen hand had trailed rings across every metal edge. Henry closed his eyes for a beat and saw himself at a younger age, peeking through a different proscenium, waiting for a cue he felt in his bones. He shook it off. 2-minute call, he said into the radio. The radio cracked and sizzled around him, hitting a hot pan. Lucas lasted another minute before he stood. I'm just going to look, he told no one, which is how people confess to a future version of themselves. He descended the pit stairs slowly, one hand on the rail. His boots made a careful hollow knock on each step, the sound of a clock counting down. The Steinway wore its moth-eaten cover like a molting animal. Lucas folded it back and watched dust rise and fall. He didn't sit. Not yet. He took the tuning fork from his pocket, struck it on his wrist, and held it near the strings. The fork sang its pure A, and the piano answered, a sympathetic shimmer, a ghost of a note vibrating in its long spine. Lucas felt the matched tone in the bridge of his nose and the meat of his palms. Out in the house, the note went hunting, skating the balconies with a thin silver thread of sound. Lucas Henry called over the radio. Status. Visual only Lucas lied, because lies sometimes keep the truth from tipping over. Rose and Brian reached the projection booth. The glass was clouded with time. On a shelf lay a stack of reels that had fused into a single brown donut. Rose opened a tin. Inside only ash and the ghost of vinegar. When she set the lid down, it spun and made a tight, wobbling whir. She found a ledger, ran her finger down. Names, dates, notes in a crabbed hand. Dress rehearsal moved to afternoon fire marshal visit. Rescheduled new gown, delivered crimson silk. Crimson, not red, Rose said. Even the words wore gowns. From the hallway outside the booth, the stage manager's 2 quick knocks sounded ready, ready. Brian looked up. That one was in this world, he said. Then faintly, a wooden baton tapped 3 times on an invisible music stand. Talk, talk, talk. And that one wasn't. On the fly floor, Emma put a palm against the ceiling plaster. Listen, she told Henry without irony. A dry hairline crackling radiated through the lath, the near-silent rice crisp of microfracture. We keep our time short, she said. I don't trust the crown. Somewhere in the auditorium belly, a breath gathered like a wave and broke into a soft, unanimous hush, the sound hundreds make when the conductor lifts his arms. Henry's posture changed without permission. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted, his chest filled as if to take a down beat. He caught himself, swore once under his breath, and radioed regroup at stage in 60. Lucas finally sat. The bench had learned his weight. He placed his hands in his lap to pretend patience. From the darkness behind him, Silk whispered as if someone moved. He turned. No curtain. Only the idea of one. "I'll play a scale," he said to the air. "For pitch." He waited for Henry to tell him not to. Henry didn't. The opera did. A high, careful vowel floated down the pit stair, then widened into a rounded, the way teachers shape a student's mouth. Lucas's throat moved in answer. He placed his fingers on the keys and made a choice. He played C just C. The note rang clean as a snowfall, and then a second voice braided itself through the string's decay like a silver filament. It was not an echo. It was a partner. Lucas lifted his hand, shook it once like a fencer's settling grip, and played a phrase he loved when he was 12. And his teacher told him his hands were clumsy, but his heart wasn't. The piano's sound warmed so gently, it felt like a hand on the back of his neck. On the stage above the red dress rotated half an inch. Emma saw it and marked the angle in her head. "That batten is drifting," she said. The rope ends at the wings clicked twice faster, like a heartbeat speeding up. Brian leaned over the rail of the projection booth for a wide shot. From the house below, the flutter of phantom programs rose a satin rustle. He swallowed. "I'm getting applause anxiety without applause," he told Rose, which was his best joke in a while. Rose stared through the glass at Lucas, small in the pit, like a figure in a snow globe, and remembered every story she had read about doomed artists who thought their art would love them back. When Lucas played the next chord, a bright harmonic rang from somewhere high, right a bell no one could see. She pressed a hand flat to the booth's wood. The wood answered with a low, contented hum. "I don't like this," she said. "Me neither," Brian said, and didn't move. Henry and Emma started down. The rungs of the ladder pinged like a decreasing row of tuning forks, high to low, to lower under their weight. At the deck, Henry looked up and whistled once sharp to call everyone home, out of an old habit from college theater. The whistle cut the air and came back delayed not once, but twice the second echo, slightly mocking. Enough, he said more to the woman in the red dress than to his friends. They reconvened center stage. Lucas climbed out of the pit, breathing like a man who'd been swimming just under the surface. "There's something in the bench," he said. "Not objects. Feeling with a key." "Feelings later," Henry said, "because they frightened him more than ghosts. We get our last looks and go." The opera disliked that plan. A low, slow creak floated across the ceiling, the sound of an old ship shifting its bones. Emma's head snapped up. "Crown is talking," she said. "Henry, we have to Saule." Rope sang a high, tense twang that stopped as if warned. The dress held. From the farthest balcony, a laugh that wasn't like a spirit, and then cut itself off, embarrassed by its own existence. Rose's pen slipped and drew a thin ink scar across her page. 30 seconds, Henry said. Rose buttoned it with something respectful. Rose stepped to the lip like a docent with a conscience. "Eliza Moreau," she said, "if people failed you in life, I am trying not to fail you in death. Keep your voice, keep your stage. Let us keep ours." For one beat, the opera listened. Then, from the wings, a quiet heel-toe crossed the floorboards and stopped just out of sight, accompanied by the faint tick of beads against silk. Brian squared his shoulders toward the sound. "We're not alone on stage left," he whispered, not raising his camera for once. Emma reached for Henry's sleeve. "Now," she said, "we go." A small crack answered directly above a brittle pop, and a sprinkle of plastic hissed down like salt. "Now," Henry agreed. "Load out." They backed toward the side corridor the way professionals never turn backs on a live stage. Behind them, a single pitch formed out of nothing the slender beginning of a soprano's line and drew a straight, shining path into the dark. Lucas blinked tears he would later attribute to dust. At the edge of the wings, they passed the rope lines. Lucas stopped without meaning to. The coil of piano wire he had found earlier lay on a crate where he must have left it. It had changed to shape, or his eyes had a looser loop become a tighter, brighter knot. "Don't touch," Emma said, which made touching audible in Lucas's bones. He didn't. From the crate, an almost inaudible metallic sigh leaked the voice of metal, remembering tension. They reached the corridor. The house behind them breathed out a long communal exhale, and the silk of the red dress made a faint, approving "s" as it turned another fraction. Henry set a hand to the door bar. Somewhere inside the wall, a bolt clacked back with an old, satisfying clunk. The door opened more easily than earlier, like a deal accepted. They stepped into the alley. The city met them with the comfortable clutter of sound heels on pavement, a bus chuffing someone laughing too loud a street over, and for a second, it felt like being woken from a dream by a radio. Emma looked up at the fly tower and then down at her clipboard. "Tomorrow, I bring the laser disto," she said, because science was the rope she trusted more than any other. "Tomorrow we don't come," Henry said. He meant it. He believed it, as long as he was under the sky. Rose slid the gala program card back into her notebook. "Crimson," she said again, and pictured a woman in a dress that color walking into a room and choosing the light she wanted to be seen in. From deep in the house, a far, thin brava drifted up the smallest ghost of approval. Rose's face changed gratitude or dread, hard to say. Lucas pressed the tuning fork to his palm and felt the vibration die. When it went silent, the sudden lack of tone made a tiny thump in his ears. He thought of the bench, its little cathedral of hummingwood. He thought of hands that were not his placing notes, like pins on a map that led to fire. Brian sealed the Pelican case. The latches snapped shut with a tidy double click, the only crisp sound he wanted to hear for the rest of the night. He slung the strap over his shoulder and squinted back into the lobby through the cracked glass. Inside the chandelier made a barely audible crystalline tremble, as if laughing in its sleep. "Same time never," Henry said, and made himself walk away. Behind him, from the quiet stage, a baton tapped 3 times, tock, 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 calling a rehearsal he pretended not to hear. No one mentioned that the opera had begun to set tempos for them. No one said aloud that tonight felt like a first act, the way a promise opens and asks for payment later. As they reached the corner, a passing train breathed a low iron rumble, and under it, so faint it was almost mercy. The soprano's voice floated after them on a single word that might have been stay. They turned anyway. They said they would sleep. They said they would edit footage and label files and write sensible notes and touch sensible hands and wake up liking the daylight. Inside the opera wood settled with a contented crackle, and somewhere under the stage a piano tested its pedal with a soft, depressed thump that pretended to be accidental. The red dress did not stop turning. Its wire did not stop remembering what wire is for. They tried not to return. They told themselves enough footage had been captured, enough ambience recorded. But the opera called like a wound, scratching under a bandage. By the third night, Henry was the only one still saying no. The others framed it as research art or closure. But beneath all the rationalizing was the same thing, obsession. So they met again at the alley door. Henry cursed himself while unlocking it. "This is the last time," he said. The door hinges whined a high-pitched complaint, sharper than before. They stepped inside. The lobby's drip was gone, replaced by a faint rhythmic scrape like heel leather, dragging over tile, long, slow, patient. Emma muttered, "That's not water anymore." The auditorium smelled of smoke that couldn't exist after a century. The red dress hovered still, yet every one of them swore it now faced stage right instead of center. Brian whispered continuity error, but his voice trembled. Lucas touched the rail of the orchestra pit. "She wants music," he said. "No," Henry snapped. "She wants us." From high in the balconies, as though hundreds were leaning forward, waiting for the overture. Lucas descended into the pit before Henry could stop him. Each step made a wooden groan, stretched taut like strings being tuned. He sat at the Steinway, its lid propped open as if someone had been expecting him. He pressed a key. The note rang pure for a heartbeat, then fractured into a second tone, higher, sharper, the echo of a soprano matching him. His fingers shook. He tried a phrase. The piano answered like breath over embers warm at first, then flaring bright with crackles that sounded like fire-chewing wood. Emma shouted from above, "Lucas, stop!" Her voice cracked. It multiplied in the rafters, dozens of Emmas overlapping each, begging him differently. But Lucas smiled. "She's harmonizing with me." Henry clenched his fists. "She's rehearsing your funeral." Meanwhile, Rose prowled the aisles, notebook clutched tight. At a row near the center, she found programs, fresh, not century-old, laid neatly on the seats. She touched one. Ink smudged onto her fingers, Gala Night, December 18th, 1910. Her stomach lurched. "Brian," she hissed, "come look." Brian turned his lens. The camera caught a flutter of pages, all programs opening at once, the paper crackling like a sudden windstorm. Rose gasped. They've been waiting 100 years for the second act. On the fly floor, Emma studied the counterweights. "Henry," she whispered, "these pins are bending. The load is changing itself." Above a rope gave a dry twang, the sound of sinew tearing. Dust rained down. Henry barked into the radio, "Everyone out. Now." Lucas struck another chord instead. The soprano's voice burst over it, a piercing note that filled the opera like glass shatterings. Brian dropped his camera to cover his ears. The sound was too clean, too sharp. It hummed inside their teeth, inside their skulls. Lucas tried to rise from the bench, but something held him. He looked down. The coil of piano wire had looped itself around his wrists, tightening. "Help!" he screamed. Henry bolted toward the pit, but too late. The wire hissed, tightening with a violin's whine, and lashed upward around Lucas's throat. Lucas's eyes bulged. His legs kicked the pedals uselessly. The piano lid slammed shut with a thunderous boom reverberating like a drumbeat. The last sound from Lucas was a choking gurgle, swallowed by the soprano's triumphant high C. Silence fell. Lucas slumped head at an unnatural angle. Rose screamed. Her scream splintered into the balconies, where unseen voices repeated it back in mocking echoes. Emma dragged Rose toward the aisle. "Go move," Brian tried to scoop up his camera. His hands shook so badly he dropped it again. The tape inside spun by itself, clicking, whirring, as if recording on command. Then came the smell, thick, acrid smoke, and the snap of phantom flame. Wood-crackled seats popped the same sound survivors described in 1910. Orange light licked the walls, but there was no fire. They could see only light and heat, with no source flames that belonged to memory, not physics. Henry shouted, "Exit now." They staggered down the aisle. Every seat back rattled, banging in rhythm like an ovation of fists. At the stage steps, Brian froze. His lens pointed upward on instinct. "If I capture this, it'll be don't you dare," Henry roared. From the stage, ropes slithered. A shadow like a hand yanked Brian's collar and dragged him onto the boards. He clawed at the floor. "Help me!" A spotlight blazed to life overhead, blinding white, centering him as though he were tonight's star. Then the trap beneath him opened. Brian screamed once before falling. His body hit with a sickening thud against an iron column below, echoing like a muffled drum. The light blinked out. Only Henry and Emma saw the blood seeping from under the boards. Rose had already collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The soprano began again this time, softer, haunting a lullaby, threading through the smoke. It pulled at Rose's body like gravity. She swayed. Emma shook her. "Stand up," Rose whispered. "She's beautiful." Henry hauled them both toward the side exit. Every door handle they tried rattled violently, metal clanging as though gripped from another side. Finally, one gave. Cold night air gushed in. The city's ordinary sound cars, voices, sirens, flooded their ears like salvation. They stumbled into the alley, choking, coughing eyes wet. Behind them, the opera stood quiet again. No smoke, no flame, no light. Only the faint shimmer of silk from the red dress still turning on its invisible wire. Henry counted 3 left, 2 gone. Emma bent forward, hands on knees, and said flatly, "Next time it's us." Rose only whispered, "Next time is already written." From deep inside, a single note followed them low, sorrowful, vibrating in the bricks of the alley wall. They didn't plan the 4th return. It happened like gravity, like falling into a pit you already saw but couldn't avoid. Henry told himself it was to retrieve the equipment Brian had dropped. Emma claimed it was to assess the structural instability before the building killed more trespassers. Rose, eyes hollow, said she had questions only Eliza Moreau could answer. None of them admitted it out loud. The opera had chosen them, and chosen meant summoned. They came at midnight this time. The street was hushed, lamps haloed in mist. The opera loomed like a mausoleum. Soon as Henry touched the door, a faint soprano hum threaded out, low, warm, coaxing. He froze. "She knows we're here," Rose whispered. The hinge didn't creak this time. Instead, it sighed a long, exhaled welcome. Inside, the lobby glowed faintly, though no light was present. The chandelier swayed without wind, its crystals chiming a delicate lullaby of glass. Emma muttered, "This place is running on fuel that isn't physics." Rose clutched her notebook. It's running on her. The auditorium was no longer empty. Every seat looked occupied, shapes, faint as smoke, shimmering like heat haze. They weren't solid, but they had weight in the air. The rustle of phantom programs filled the hall, joined by polite coughs and the soft tap of canes against floorboards. Henry's skin prickled. "Don't acknowledge them," he said, eyes forward. But Rose couldn't help herself. She raised her chin like a lecturer and whispered, "Good evening." The audience replied with a wave of murmurs, indistinct but eager, rising like surf before an aria. The red dress hovered at center stage, brighter than ever, its hem fluttering though the air was still. Emma scanned the rigging. Her engineer's mind tried to fight the terror. She pointed at the batten holding the dress. "That load is shifting on its own. If it drops, it'll take the fly floor with it." Henry said, "Then we don't go under it." but the ropes above groaned in chorus, creaking like an orchestra tuning drawn-out notes of strain. Dust rained down, shimmering in the ghost light. Emma tugged Henry's sleeve. "This place is collapsing. Every second we stay is suicide." From overhead came a sudden sharp snap twang, and then silence, the dreadful silence of a string pulled too far, but not yet broken. Rose stepped forward anyway, eyes locked on the red dress. She whispered, "Eliza, was it really fire, or did they let you burn?" The soprano answered with a note, gentle, sorrowful, that filled the room with aching vibrato. Rose gasped. She heard me. Henry grabbed her arm. "Back. Now." Rose pulled free, striding to the center. The floorboards under her seemed to brighten, glowing faintly. Each step she took produced a wooden moan, like the stage was sighing approval. At the dress, she lifted her hand, as if to touch the fabric. The silk swished softly, a whisper of fabric brushing against unseen skin. Rose Emma screamed. The soprano's voice swelled, rising from lament to triumph, a crescendo shaking plaster loose in gritty showers. The air heated. Rose looked up, eyes wide, but not in fear, in reverence. A roar erupted, crackling flame with no visible fire. The sound of wood splintering cloth, catching the theater, remembering its own death. Orange light bled across the rafters. Phantom fire licked the curtains without consuming them. The smell of burned hair stung their noses. Rose stretched her arms wide, notebook falling from her grip. "Take me," she cried. A sudden whoosh ignited around her, and phantom fire clung to her body like a gown of flame. She screamed once, the sound piercing before it turned into a hideous harmony with the soprano's aria. Henry lunged forward, but the heat forced him back. Emma pulled him away. "You can't reach her." Rose's silhouette writhed in the inferno. The flames crackled hungrily, a choir of wood and silk combusting. Then with one final shriek, she collapsed. When the light faded, only ash lay where she had stood, ash in the shape of a woman bowing. Emma and Henry staggered back, choking. Above them, the ropes groaned in deep guttural tones like beasts in pain. The audience, those shimmering shapes, rose to their feet. A storm of applause thundered, thousands of phantom hands, clapping seats slamming upright in rhythmic bangs. Henry shouted out. They ran for the side corridor. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, magnified, as if the stage itself was chasing them. At the door, Henry shoved, but it wouldn't budge. Emma threw her weight against it. The iron screamed a shrill metallic squeal before finally bursting open. They spilled into the alley, gasping for breath. Henry leaned against the wall chest, heaving. "3 gone," he said. 2 left. Emma looked back at the building. The windows glowed faint orange, as though fire raged inside, but no smoke escaped. From within, a soprano held a single note, long unbroken, vibrating against the glass until it shivered faintly. Emma whispered, "She's finishing her aria." Henry shook his head. "She's finishing us." They turned away, but both knew the opera wasn't done. As they left, the faint sound of a piano followed keys pressing themselves one after another, a lullaby that promised only ruin. Henry and Emma were the only ones left. The opera knew it. They stood in the alley, backs against the cold brick lungs still raw from phantom smoke. Neither spoke for minutes. The city around them carried on horns, laughter trains, yet all those sounds felt thinner, weaker, like echoes of a real world already fading. Finally, Henry said, "We're done. No more." Emma's eyes were hollow. "You know that isn't true." From inside the opera, a faint piano chord floated out, soft, patient beckoning. They returned at dawn when the city was gray and half asleep. Not midnight, not twilight dawn, as if trying to trick the opera by choosing an hour it hadn't owned before. It didn't matter. The moment the door opened, a low hum greeted them, the sound of hundreds of throats warming up together. The lobby was different, cleaner. The carpet looked less rotten, the chandelier brighter. Emma stopped cold. She's restoring it. Henry tightened his jaw. Or were the ones rotting? They stepped into the auditorium. Every seat was filled. Ghost patrons sharper now, their outlines dressed in gowns and tuxedos, their faces shimmering like candlelight on water. The sound of programs, rustling canes, tapping shoes, shifting, all of it alive, all of it wrong. At center stage, the red dress floated, but now it wasn't empty. A shape filled it, a woman's form, indistinct, glowing faintly like embers in silk. "Eliza," Emma whispered. The soprano began to sing low, aching, the voice of someone who knows she is about to die and intends to die beautifully. Emma clutched Henry's arm. "If we cut the wires, collapse the rigging, the place will cave in. That might break the cycle." Henry stared at her. "You'll bring the whole roof down on us." "It's already falling," she said. "At least let's choose when." Above them, the ropes groaned, each one singing its complaint, a discordant orchestra tuning for the final act. Henry nodded because logic no longer mattered, only endings did. They climbed the ladder to the fly floor together. Each rung sang a metallic ping higher as they rose like ascending a giant xylophone. Below, the soprano's aria swelled. Her voice poured upward, notes brushing their skin like hot wind. At the fly floor, Emma pulled a crowbar from her pack. She wedged it into the counterweight pins. "When I pry, it'll drop. The dress, the rigging, all of it." Henry's hands shook. "We won't survive." Emma smiled faintly. "Neither will she." "Maybe that's enough." She braced her foot and heaved. The pins screamed as it bent, a screech of tortured metal. Below, the soprano's voice broke anger now sharp enough to slice air. The phantom audience hissed in unison, 1,000 disapproving breaths. Emma shouted over it, "You had your night. It's over." The pin snapped free. Instantly, ropes lashed, counterweights slammed, and the fly system wailed like a choir being strangled. Dust exploded from the ceiling. The dress plummeted. But before Emma could move, another rope whipped free and wrapped around her waist. It yanked. She screamed, dropping the crowbar. Henry lunged for her hand, but missed. With a sickening snap, the rope hauled Emma upward into the rafters. Her scream twisted into a ragged harmony with the soprano's note. Then silence. Only her hard hat fell, striking the stage with a dull crack. Henry stood, frozen dust in his hair, Emma's absence a hole beside him. Now he was alone. He descended to the stage legs, trembling. The opera had grown bright. Ghost chandeliers glowed, sconces flickered, velvet curtains looked alive. The audience sat straighter, expectant. At center stage, the figure in the red dress solidified. Pale arms, dark hair, eyes that glowed like coal. Eliza Moreau. She opened her mouth. The note she unleashed shook the entire house, rattling every beam, vibrating every rib in Henry's chest. Henry dropped to his knees. "Please, take me. Leave me." Just ended. Eliza's gaze burned into him. The piano in the pit struck itself 3 chords, firm, commanding. Henry recognized them, an introduction. She wanted accompaniment. The bench was empty now, waiting. His body moved before his mind did. He stumbled down to the pit, sat at the Steinway. His hands hovered over the keys. When he touched them, the sound burst forth richer than any instrument he had ever known, bright, searing, layered with voices. Eliza sang. He played, Together they performed the aria she had been denied in life. The house roared with approval. The applause was deafening, a storm of phantom hands pounding seats, slamming cheers rising. Henry's tears blurred the keys. His fingers bled, cut by wires that weren't there. Still he played. Still she sang. As the aria reached its climax, flames erupted across the stage, phantom fire crackling, roaring, the sound of a theater consuming itself once more. Henry laughed through tears. "Yes," he whispered. "Burn it all." The ceiling split. Beams crashed. Ghost patrons screamed in delight. The last thing Henry saw was Eliza stepping forward, arms outstretched, her dress of flame billowing wide. Her final note pierced everything, glass-sharp, endless, until it cut straight into his skull. He dropped forward onto the keys. The piano answered with a discordant slam, then silence. Morning. Fire crews found the opera intact. No smoke, no flame, no collapse. Just an empty, dust-choked ruin as it had been for a century. They found no Henry, no Emma, no Rose, no Brian, no Lucas. But if you stand in the alley and the wind is right, you can hear it. A soprano voice echoing through the bricks. A piano chord struck by hands that aren't there. The faint crackle of firewood, the rattle of phantom applause. The opera lives. The opera sings. And somewhere inside, Henry still plays, his mind gone, his body gone, only his music remaining. The red dress sways from its wire, always facing center stage. And the aria never ends.